In the spring of 16, they met by chance. A spark ignited a fleeting romance. But shadows loomed and secrets grew. In the heart of Laura, deception flew. Oh Laura, why'd you weave those lies? A tale of love turned to despise. Mike believed in what he couldn't see. A fake pregnancy, a false reality. Promises whispered in the dark of night, but truth and trust were out of sight. She claimed a life that never was, a fragile bond broken because. Oh Laura, why'd you weave those lies? A tale of love turned to despise. Mike believed in what he couldn't see. A fake pregnancy, a false reality. In the end, the truth came clear. A story of heartbreak, pain, and fear. Lessons learned, hearts to mend. A chapter closed, but wounds to tend. Oh Laura, why'd you weave those lies? A tale of love turned to despise. Mike believed in what he couldn't see. A fake pregnancy, a false reality. Now they walk on separate ways. Memories of those tangled days. A cautionary tale for you and me. Of love, deceit, and what should be.
Hey besties! This is the story of Laura Michelle Owens, and we're going to do a deep dive into the Napkin story. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Napkin story. The Napkin story is a story that Laura has told many times on many different occasions about a trip to Iceland that she took with Mike Marraccini. And on that flight, on December 30th, 2016, Laura claims that Mike was abusing her on the plane. She was distraught, in tears, and a woman that was sitting in front of her that had never seen her passed her a note that saved her life, that showed her that what she was going through and the abuse she was enduring was unacceptable and she needed to get out. And that napkin is the basis for why she left Mike Marraccini, according to Laura. So, buckle up and enjoy the deep dive. First, we're going to look at some of the history of Laura and Mike's relationship. In July and August of 2016, Laura lied about being pregnant. She didn't lie just once about being pregnant. She lied twice about being pregnant. She also lied about having cancer and having an ovary removed and getting multiple abortions. She lied a lot, and Mike had some trust issues. And in December of 2016, their relationship was on the rocks. So Laura decided to book a trip to Iceland for the two of them to try and repair their relationship. On December 30th of 2016, they take a flight to Iceland. They return sometime in January of 2017. In March of 2017, they go on another trip to Dubai. And in June, they go on a trip to Carmel. July of 2017, Laura says that she began to withdraw from the relationship. And on November 7th, 2017, Jan Owens, Laura Owens' mom, reaches out to the Napkin lady. March 29th, 2018, Laura filed a declaration with the court where she relays her version of the story from Iceland. I'm going to read it for you now. On December 30th, 2016, Mr. Marraccini and I flew to Iceland. We had been planning this trip since early November and decided on Iceland since Mr. Marraccini wanted to go there. He said the trip would help our relationship. He told me everything he wanted to do in Iceland, and I planned and paid for it. The trip cost at least $15,000, and I emptied my childhood savings account to pay for it. During the flight from San Francisco to Reykjavik, Iceland, Mr. Marraccini berated me nonstop for hours. He criticized me for nearly everything I said or did. If I turned my head to look at him when he said something, he'd criticize me for turning too quickly, telling me that my reflexes were unnaturally fast and that there was something wrong with me. He criticized my career and told me I was bad at my job and was worthless. He told me I was ugly and that nobody else would ever want to date me. When I would try to kiss him and cheer him up, he'd tell me I was gross and a bad kisser. He said I was bad in bed. Then he said he wanted to have a threesome since sex with me was so boring. He suggested a threesome with my sister or with a black man. He said it would turn him on to watch someone else have sex with me. I told him no and that I felt uncomfortable. He seemed to enjoy putting me down. His criticisms went on for hours, and I cried on and off throughout the entire flight. Around 6 hours into the flight, Mr. Marraccini went to the bathroom. I stayed in my seat and was crying. A passenger in the row in front of me slipped me a note. Laura then quoted the napkin in her declaration. I do have a picture of the napkin, so I'm going to post it here. Dear girlfriend, I know the Lord had me overhear your conversation to let you know you are a very beautiful young woman, and that you should have a man that makes you cry with wonderful laughter, not bullying. You are being abused, and he will never love you like you deserve. I am very concerned about you, and I'm praying for you. Run from him and get help and protection. He doesn't care what you think or say or do. He is a very sick man and will make you sick if you stay with him. Please take this to heart and get help fast. Let's continue reading Laura's declaration. I was shocked when I read the note. For the first time, I started to realize that Mr. Marraccini was emotionally abusive, which is not something I wanted to acknowledge. After reading it, I quickly put the note in my backpack to make sure he didn't see it. I was scared that he would lose his temper and make a scene if he found out about it. I also did not want him to know who gave it to me in fear that he would lash out at her. For the rest of the flight, I tried to avoid talking to him since I didn't want him to get mad. Physical abuse. In the middle of the first or second night of our Iceland trip, I was sound asleep when Mr. Marraccini woke me up by screaming at me. He was in a rage, the likes of which I had never before seen. He was furious at me for sending a photo of us in Iceland to a friend of mine via Snapchat, which got back to him via another friend. I didn't think I had done anything wrong and couldn't understand why he was so mad, but he just kept screaming at me. He said he didn't want people to know he went to Iceland with me, since he told everyone he was going alone. He told me he was embarrassed to be seen with me. Throughout the trip, he didn't want me in any of his social media posts or photos. Then, he told me that if I went along with what he wanted and was good on the trip, then maybe he would post photos of us together and tell people he was with me. He insulted me and put me down repeatedly, calling me a fucking psychopath and a crazy. As he was screaming at me, I pulled out the note from the WOW airline passenger. I told him he treated me so badly that even a total stranger was concerned for my well-being, but he didn't seem to care and just brushed it off. I have never seen him so enraged and was afraid he would snap and hurt me. I felt like he wasn't even treating me like a human being. I cried myself to sleep that night. June 13th, 2018. At Mike's deposition, he was asked, "What was your response when you found out that a fellow passenger gave Laura a note?" I'm sorry, did you find out that a fellow passenger gave Laura a note? Mike responded, "Yeah, she told me in Iceland." He's then asked, "And what was your response when she told you that?" Mike responded that person had no idea what I had just gone through, and so that I'm sorry that someone else had to hear our discussion, but at the time, that person had no idea what had just transpired over the last month. November 7th, 2017. Jan Owens, Laura Owens' mom, reaches out to the Napkin lady. In her declaration, Jan states, I decided to reach out to the passenger who wrote the note to Laura on the flight to Iceland. Laura and I had talked several times about wanting to thank her for intervening that day, since it was an eye-opening experience for Laura. On November 7th, 2017, I sent an email to the address listed on the cocktail napkin Laura was given. I explained that I was trying to locate the woman who took the time to write Laura the note and asked if I had the correct email address. The following day, November 8th, 2017, I received a response from a woman named Karen saying, I remember your beautiful daughter. I sent Karen an email that day explaining that Laura was doing much better since she had broken things off with Mike and thanking her for the note. I told her Laura's eyes were really open to what a bad relationship she was in when she received the note from her on the flight that day. Two months after Jan reached out to Napkin Lady, Laura files a domestic violence restraining order against Mike Marraccini on January 9th, 2018, where she claims for the first time that he abused her. This is the first time Mike learned about the abuse. July 10th, 2020. Laura files to renew her domestic violence restraining order against Michael Marraccini for another 5 years. She's already moved to Arizona by this point, but she still says that she fears for her life and therefore she needs this restraining order granted, which it was granted on September 11th, 2020. In July of 2020, Laura posted on her personal and professional Facebook accounts about the napkin story. She said, I wanted to share what eventually made me leave the abusive relationship I was in. This note on a cocktail napkin from a very brave stranger. I was on a 9-hour flight with my ex-boyfriend, and for much of the time, he was putting me down. He warned me not to post any photos with him because he was embarrassed to be seen on social media with someone as ugly as me. In the same breath, he said that if we weren't together, no one would want to date me. He said nothing about me was lovable. I had come to believe him, and all I could do was nod and cry at what a worthless person I was. Side note, I never understood why victims would stay with their abuser until I was in this situation myself. To this day, I don't think I can explain well to anyone who asked me why I didn't immediately leave. A few hours into the flight, he went to the bathroom. As soon as he left, the lady in the seat in front of me passed me this note, which I quickly read and put in my pocket out of fear that he would see it. Throughout our trip, I kept it with me and read it over and over again. As broken as I was and as worthless as I felt, the words of this woman gave me the one universal feeling we all need: hope. The stranger left her name and email on the note, and as soon as I found the courage to leave the relationship, I contacted her to let her know. She was shocked to hear from me and stunned that it was the catalyst for me leaving. She said that she had questioned whether or not to give me the note, but that something had compelled her to. She talked about the randomness of it all and where I would be if we had not been booked on the same flight, or if she had been seated in a different row. That's the beautiful thing about life. Just when you've lost your faith in humanity, a stranger serendipitously appears and renews it. I hope that if you're ever in the situation that she was in, you have the courage to reach out to someone like me. It might save a life, change a life, keep a life the same, or just make someone think you're crazy and intrusive. Who cares if you are? You probably won't see them again, but maybe, just maybe, you'll help that person see the light at the tunnel. Maybe you'll end up being their stranger. January 26, 2022. A TEDx talk is released where Laura talks about the abuse that she went through during her relationship with Mike. I'm going to be playing a clip for you in the next slide where she talks about the Iceland trip and the napkin story.
We'd had a fairy tale start, and then it came down fast. It seemed like overnight his charm and compliments turned to criticism. His comments became more and more menacing until finally the verbal abuse became physical. The first thing he did once we landed in Iceland and got to the hotel was ask me to pick a number. Not knowing why, I picked 40. He said that was how many times he was going to slap me. He did, and then he choked me. The less oxygen I breathed in, the more he smiled. And for the first time in months, he praised me. "Good girl," he said. My mind flashed on the note. He was truly sick, and I was in danger. I begged him to stop, and he stormed off. I thought he'd left the room, so I went to my backpack and I reread the note. I had no idea that he was standing behind me. He told me to hand him the note. He said, "I knew she was listening all along. She doesn't know what she's talking about." His face was red with anger and a vein popped out on his forehead. He tore up the note, figured it would never be brought up again, but luckily I'd taken a picture. Even with all of that drama, we made it to dinner. He abruptly left right before the check came. He said he needed to go shoot footage for his Instagram and told me not to go find him. He said he didn't want to be seen in photos or videos with me because it would hurt his chances of becoming Insta-famous, which was a big goal for him. He thought that if he appeared to be alone, he would appear single, and that would get him a lot of female followers. My heart was broken, and I had no sense of direction, both literally and figuratively. I mean, truly, I had no service, and I was lost. I asked 2 people for help finding my way back to the hotel, but they didn't speak English. I stumbled around the streets of Reykjavik in the highest heels I owned and in a sleeveless dress that was as inappropriate as you could get for the snowstorm I was in. The fireworks went off at midnight, and I could hear people in the distance cheering. I could feel their excitement about the idea of a new year, new hopes, new dreams, new goals. And then there was me, looking worse than ever after crying for the better part of 24 hours. I slipped into an alley. I was numb from the blanket of hopelessness and unworthiness I felt. The only wish I had for the year was to redo my life and become a different person, since my boyfriend had convinced me I was a failure and I couldn't fix myself, but that wasn't going to happen. The last thing I wanted to do was die, but he had convinced me that there wasn't a place for me on earth. He said that he didn't want to end our relationship, but I couldn't understand why he didn't want to when he treated me like he hated me. He said that I brought it out of him, that it was my fault, that he'd never been violent before he met me, that I was responsible for his transformation from the all-American boy to American psycho.
June 27th, 2023, Laura and Napkin Lady published the story about the Iceland trip in Chicken Soup for the Soul. This post is later removed on July 22nd, 2024, after Judge Matter ruled that Laura lied in court about the Clayton pregnancy and likely lied in the other court cases against the other men and her other victims. So you might be wondering, what actually happened to the napkin note? Well, I don't know for sure, but let's take a look at the different stories Laura has. In her testimony on March 29, 2018, Laura states her and Mike are arguing. She took the note out of her backpack and told him he treated her so badly that even a total stranger was concerned for her well-being. He didn't seem to care and he just brushed it off. In a Facebook post on July 22, 2020, Laura states that she quickly read the note and then put it in her pocket out of fear that Mike would see it. She says that throughout the trip, she kept the note with her and read it over and over again. She didn't mention if Mike saw the note or not. And in her TEDx talk, Laura states that the first night in their hotel, Mike caught her reading the note, and he demanded she hand it over. He then allegedly ripped it up, but not before she could get a picture of it. In Mike's deposition, he admits that he knew about the napkin. He just says he didn't really care, because the woman obviously had no idea what he had been going through. But don't take my word for it, or even Mike's in his deposition. I'm going to be playing for you in a few seconds an interview that Megan Fox, the writer, did with Mike Marraccini. where she talks about the Iceland story, about Laura in her little dress and super high heels out in the snowstorm. And they also talk about the napkin and the flight. I'm going to be playing a couple of clips from that interview, but you can find the rest of the link to the video in the description below. And you should definitely check it out because it's an incredible video where Mike gets to tell his story for really the first time.
Was any part of the Iceland story true or all lies? And he hasn't really seen her entire story about that, but certainly the dramatic parts of it were untrue. I don't know. The one part you probably haven't heard, but did make me laugh. Was her tale of wandering around aimlessly with no coat in a snowstorm.
Wait, that's what she says on there?
Yes. That at some point she left the hotel or running around in a snowstorm and got lost and was in an alleyway, sinking to the ground in a pile of snow in a sleeveless dress. And that really made me chuckle because it was so Amber Heard-esque, staring at the dirty carpet. All of that, those really ridiculous details that.
Is she saying that I took like her bag? Is that what?
No,
I took her clothes, or what is?
No, I think she was just saying that she was trying to get away, and got lost, and she was lost in a snowstorm. Did she go missing in a snowstorm while you were in Iceland that you know of?
No.
You don't say. I'm shocked. Was any part of the
hopefully my last question, and apologies if you'd covered this because I missed the beginning, but the whole basis of her Iceland story is that you were this horrible person on a flight. When we talked, you had mentioned that it's because you told her you still don't trust her. Was she manipulating you at that point with hysteria? Like, did you trigger her by saying you didn't trust her? And what kind of what was the combustible moment there?
Yeah. So that video is multiply that by 10, and that's what she was on that flight.
Oh my God.
You have to imagine we're on a red-eye flight. We're in a tube 30,000 feet in the air, and we're and so she was crying hysterically, but leading up to the trip, I'll kind of give you this.
Tell me you're not sitting in the middle seat, please.
I mean, it was WOW. It was like a WOW Airlines. It was like a Spirit. So I'm sure we fit right in there.
She staged for the flight on a budget airline.
Airline. But it was.
Didn't even do Iceland Air.
So leading up to the trip, she bought the tickets and then originally said hey, you can go. I bought the tickets for us, as an apology for everything I put you through, with self-harm and all these things leading up. And so I was already going on a trip, and my family was like, hey, you should just go on it. I think it'd be really fun. They told that, Laura told us all the things that she's going to be doing on this trip. And then probably about a week before, 2 weeks before the trip, she's like, hey, I think just you should go. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I'll go by myself. And then 48 hours before the trip, her family and my family both said hey, you two should do it together. I think it's a once in a lifetime experience. And I told them, I was I just don't Laura kept wanting me to say that I loved her and that I trusted her and that I moved past what had just happened. And I mean, 2 weeks before, she had told me that she'd faked the pregnancies, that, her dad told me that she exaggerates a lot of her stories. And then, he said, do whatever you have to for the next few weeks and I'll get you out of it. So I'm going off of, I don't trust her. I'm not ready to be in a committed relationship with her. And then they're kind of pushing this on me. And so when we get on the trip, she says she's going to come. I agree, obviously major regrets to that. But we get on the flight, and within I feel right when the wheels took off, it's just hammering of questions back and forth to me. It's let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this. And I just kept telling her, I was I'm not ready to be in a relationship to where I'm talking about this publicly nonstop and posting photos, because I just don't trust you, especially what you just did to me. And she starts crying hysterically on the flight to the point where people are all turning around. Like if I go out to a restaurant and my daughter acts up, who's a toddler, I immediately remove her from the situation and say like, hey, like this isn't right. I gotta walk away here. On the flight, she's crying hysterically to the point where I can't calm her down. Like I'm constantly I was like, why don't we just, you read a book, I'll leave my headphones on and watch a show. And she kept pulling my headphones off and asking me more questions.
Oh God.
And so I finally was like, I think it's best if I go and I like sit at a different part. It's a full flight, knowing it's a budget airline. So I go and I sit in the bathroom for a couple of hours.
Oh.
But I mean, the flight was very long. It was like 5-6+ hours. So I came back, after she had been crying hysterically and being in the bathroom, and she kept at it again. And I just finally told her, I was like, listen, let's try to have a good time, but like stop asking me these questions. And so when I sit there and I think about like the napkin and all that, like everything that Laura's ever done has been a lie. And so I don't know if the napkin was ever true, but like if I'm just a random person and I'm listening to this conversation where the guy seems emotionally disconnected and somebody who's obviously crying and asking for help and that they're sorry and that they want to be in a committed relationship and do I trust them? I'm saying like, no, 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 no. It might sound like it's poorly like looking at me. So I've never been able to like actually figure out if the napkin person is true. Like I also don't, like I've moved on in life, so I don't really care anymore.
I'm
But
surprised that the flight attendants didn't try to intervene at some point. And
they did. They came by
you.
and they didn't come by and move us. Like there was never like yelling on my part. It was just her crying hysterically. And they came by and asked her to quiet down because it's a red-eye flight and that people are sleeping. I don't do well with those type of things. And I mean, I just remember her crying hysterically. And I looked up and I looked around, everybody was turned around, like looking at us. And I'm like, I have another 5+ hours of this. Like, how do I solve this? And,
how did she react to the flight attendants asking her to quiet down?
She said she would, I think is what I remember. And I just told her like, I just kept telling her, I was like, you have to calm down. You have to calm down. And I think she ended up taking, I don't actually remember. I was going to say like a medication, but I actually don't remember if she did. But yeah, I remember the flight attendants coming by, and I think they came back actually twice, if I remember correctly. And they asked her to calm down both times. So yeah. It was a crazy
Deb
experience.
pointed something out very interesting here. She pulled your headphones off. Who is the one who is being physical? Yeah, that's aggressive.
They were like the big over the ear headphones, like that, like quiet, like that made everything else quiet. I think they were noise canceling. And she kept pulling them off to ask me something. And it's like,
let's conclude with some final thoughts. There are many variations of the napkin story that Laura has told over the years. 3 or 4. From what I can gather, Mike knew about the napkin. Laura told him, and he didn't care. He didn't care because he wasn't abusive. Laura had abused him emotionally and mentally to the point where he was being reactive. He didn't care anymore. And he just wanted it all to stop. And the woman is sitting in front of Laura on the plane, heard a man that was just desperate to not be in this woman's presence. And she kept bringing him back. Mike knew about the note, but he didn't care because he wasn't the abuser. Laura is. Thank you so much for watching. It really helps us out if you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel. If you want to see more of our research or our forensic level timelines, check out our Linktree link. It can be found in the description below. If you want to see more of our deep dives, check out our Laura Owens deep dive playlist. Again, thank you so much for watching, and all the best!
Laura flew to Iceland, seeking peace and light in the land of fire and ice, under the northern lights. She claimed Mike hurt her with words so cold, but the truth was twisted, a different story told. In the heart of Reykjavik, a napkin in her hand, a stranger's kindness, a gesture so grand. But behind the tale, a darker truth lies. Mike was the one who suffered under Laura's guise. Mike was at his wit's end, wanting to be free from Laura's control, her relentless decree. She used that napkin to paint herself the saint, while Mike's silent cries were lost in her complaint. In the heart of Reykjavik, a napkin in her hand, a stranger's kindness, a gesture so grand. But behind the tale, a darker truth lies. Mike was the one who suffered under Laura's guise. Mike was at his wit's end, wanting to be free from Laura's control, her relentless decree. She used that napkin to paint herself the saint, while Mike's silent cries were lost in her complaint. In the heart of Reykjavik, a napkin in her hand, a stranger's kindness, a gesture so grand. But behind the tale, the darker truth lies. Mike was the one who suffered under Laura's guise. He walked by the glaciers, felt the earth's embrace, and the geyser's steam, he found his own pace. But the napkin in her pocket, a symbol of deceit, turned his world upside down, made his pain complete. In the heart of Reykjavik, a napkin in her hand, a stranger's kindness, a gesture so grand. But behind the tale, the darker truth lies. Mike was the one who suffered under Laura's guise. Laura left Iceland with a story to tell, of how a stranger's kindness broke her silent spell. But Mike's truth remains a silent plea. In the land of ice and fire, he longs to be free.